Hi, I'm Anya Samek. I'm an associate professor at the Rady School of Management at UC San Diego. And today I'm joined by actually one of my former students who's now an assistant professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong in Shenzhen. And this is Kanyuan Huang. So welcome.
Hi, Anya. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And Kanyan is actually interesting because he is a PhD in accounting and does behavioral research in the accounting domain. And that's quite unusual. But today we're going to talk about his paper on visual nudges in lending. And so this is about borrower and consumer decision making and lending and trying to understand how we can create online lending platforms where borrowers receive personalized lists of loan recommendations. And what they're doing is testing the impact of different labels there. So, how did you become interested in that topic?
Well, I have always been interested in experiments ever since like my undergrad years when I was a student and when I was an RA for you. So that really gave me like early interest in a field experiment. But field experiment accounting is quite new. And in my PhD, I even remember when I was interviewed for my PhD program, I told one of the senior faculty in accounting I want to do field experiment. They were like, "Oh, there's no field experiment in accounting." But luckily, when I moved back to China as assistant professor, I realized there are many opportunities to work with company, and especially in our department. Our department he has connections with many like lending platforms, lending many like online companies, and so I told him that I had experience running field experiment, and he was okay. I know a company in one of the major city in the central part of China, and I know the CEO quite well. And we can potentially run some experiment. I was like, okay, let's look at what kind of data they like, what they do, and then what data they have already. So they sent us their archival data. So the company was quite new. That time was 2023. So they just started this lending online lending platform. So the company is owned by the government. So the goal for the company is for the government to facilitate the lending because that time just after COVID. So there's like the economic growth was slowing down, and the government really want people to borrow, especially for consumers. So they start this online lending platform where they encourage banks to put the loan product on the platform, and then people can pick the product on this lending platform. And we got the data. At that time, they just run this for like 4 or 5 months, and we saw that 40% of people they pick the first loan product. And now when they were like, do they have like a sorting algorithm and they recommend the best loan to the top? So we talked to the company and they were like, no, we just saw them sort of like randomly. So they ordered the product by the time of the bank put the product on the platform. So it's not ordered by specific like ranking on preference or something. They just put this sorting on the time. So the first product is not necessarily the best one. So like, okay, there seems to be some problem here because we know people often overfixate on the first item on the list, and this is clearly the case. They have this like primacy bias, and we can potentially design an experiment to help them.
And this is really interesting because as the company, if nobody there has ever thought about behavioral research or taken a class on behavioral economics or even listened to anything related to it, they would not even think that the choice of putting the bank products randomly should have any effect. And standard econ would suggest that the order doesn't matter and everybody will see all the information and pick the best fit product. So it's a really kind of a good
Mhm.
example where practitioners will get it wrong because they're not even conscious that they're making a choice by choosing to display these randomly.
Mhm.
So were there particular products that you wanted to highlight? Were there definitely better products than others that you wanted to nudge consumers toward?
So that's the challenge we face because we know that they are doing something not in the best of their interest by picking the first product. But then so our goal is to help them to pick a better loan. But then the challenge is what is a better loan? Because in their user interface, they see like the name of the bank, and they also see a few loan attributes, the interest rate, the processing time, like how fast the bank will process a loan, usually like a few days, and the approval rate. So there are three attributes that are pretty salient, and then we don't know like, do we want to recommend the loan with lowest interest rate or the loan with the fastest approval time or the loan with highest approval rate? Because we don't know their preference. And ideally, we would like to design a recommendation system and then incorporate all their preference and then give them the best loan and put on the top. But we just don't know how to do it. So we take one step back and we say, okay, since we cannot design a recommendation system, let's just like put a label, a visually salient label on the loan with one of the best attributes. We just have them pick themselves by highlighting one of the most favorable attribute. So that's like comes to this label, like the idea of using label to help them make decisions.
And so it's that, just to sum up, the idea is there's these three attributes: interest rate, how quickly the loan's processed,
Mhm.
and you mentioned another one, that is it the name of the bank?
Approval time. So
Approval
how fast it being approval rate? What's
approval
the
rate, right?
likelihood of the
Okay.
loan?
Approval rate. These three attributes. If we knew that everybody just wanted the lowest interest rate, we could just recommend the lowest interest rate one.
Mhm.
We're not sure which feature people care about most, so we'll label each with this is the lowest interest rate, this is the
Mhm.
fastest approval,
Mhm.
this is the highest approval rating. And are
Mhm.
you sorting them
Mhm.
in a particular way? Do you put those three at the top, or is it still randomly sorted?
So it's still randomly sorted. So that our design, so we don't want to put the three labels in the same for the same user because it just become really crowded. So what we did is we essentially for the treatment borrowers like who received our nudge, um, a third of them receive a low interest rate label. A third of them receive the fast processing label, and then a third of them receive the high approval rate label. For example, if you enter the platform and you're assigned to the low interest rate group, then the loan with lowest interest rate will have a very salient label says
Mhm.
lowest interest rate. Um, and the order of this label is random because so when we ask the platform not to sort the loan product by the time of the being published, but sort by randomly.
Mhm.
So essentially, the best loan will appear randomly on the list. So each borrower will receive five recommendations based on their request, like how much they want to borrow. So they receive five recommendations. We sort those five recommendations randomly, and then the product with lowest interest rate, if you're assigned into this group, will be attached to this loan. So you'll see like a yellow label.
So I thought what you were going to say is that you first survey people about which
Mhm.
attribute's most important, and then on the next screen, you highlight the attribute that's most important to them. And the reason I was thinking that would be the right way to do it is because suppose I only care about the lowest interest rate, and then I
Mhm.
come and I to the next page and I see the highest approval rating label, it may not affect me.
Mhm.
So it seems like there's different people for whom it would affect them differently. And
Mhm.
then I'm also curious whether, since there's a lot of uncertainty in general about loans and what the different terms mean, if
Mhm.
seeing a label actually conveys some kind of signal that the
Mhm.
bank is suggesting that you need to pay attention to this feature, like you need to pay attention to the approval rating, and previously you weren't. So I'm wondering
Mhm.
why you didn't do it that way? What is there? Is that worse?
Yeah, so I think what you brought up is something is really good comment in the way we thought about this. We do ask people. So when those consumers like just everyday people they enter the platform, we do give them a survey. Some of them are like standardized questions like how much you want to borrow, how long you want to borrow the loan for, um, and do you have collateral? And those who allow the platform to screen the correct product for them. And then we add the preference questions, which is we ask them how much do you value the interest rate, processing time, and the approval rate. We ask them three questions so they can rank rate 1 to 3, 1 to 7. 7 means I value this attribute most. 1 means I don't care about this attribute. Ideally, we do want to match the nudge with their preference, but technically it's really hard to achieve because essentially they are doing the survey and then they immediately enter the nudge. So it's really hard to achieve this functionality. So the best we can do is just simply measuring their preference and hope the preference uh, we can only hope the label that appears that aligns with their preference. But for a lot of times it doesn't. And that also causes problem like that also makes them less effective later on.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you what you found, and then later I wonder if we can
Mhm.
talk about
Mhm.
if you split it by the people who care about that label the
Mhm.
most. So what did you find?
So we find on average, uh, like putting a visually stating label to highlight the best loan, the loan is one of the best attributes on average doesn't help them. So when compare the loans that's selected by the treatment, the people who see the label versus the people who don't see the label in the control, there's no improvement in the interest rate that they pick. There's very little improvements in the approval rate and the processing time. So on average, the treatment effect is really small.
Hmm.
So we cannot say that our nudge make them pick better choices, which is unfortunate.
So
But also makes the
when you
but
evaluate
also
that,
makes
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
no,
When you
which
evaluate
we
those,
also
how do you
find
know what choice is the best? If the three attributes are, it's unclear how to weight the attributes. Do you have always a loan with a higher approval and a loan with a lower approval, but with all the same other features within the same list? How do we measure if it's an improvement?
oh, so we essentially just take the loans that applied by the control people, and then we look at the average interest rate, average approval rate, and the average processing
Mm,
time, and compare that to the average of the treatment group. And
gotcha.
then we don't see. And if people do take, and then we do look at the average attribute on the loan with label, and because label is the loan with one of the best attribute, and then those attributes are somewhat positively associated correlated with each other. So the loan with lowest interest rate, they often have not the best approval rate, but better than average approval rate. So if you take the label, the loan on average, you should do better than the control people. But the reason that we don't see the imp a average improvement in the treatment is that some people take the label about 60% of people they take the label alone, and then about 40 more than 40% of people they don't take the label alone, and then we find they're actually doing worse because they're avoiding the loan with the best attribute. So they are like picking something that is worse.
And you think they're doing that, they're consciously choosing not to choose the labeled one. They think it's like a sponsored ad or something.
So that's what we find. We find that there appears to be one is, as you said, there seems to there's some. So in psychology, there's this argument, persuasion resistance. So there are a bunch of like psychology people. They show that if you, so this is like relates to advertisement. So if you give them like strong advertisement signals, and then they'll just avoid the one that with the advertisement. And I think that, and the way think one of the reasons is this persuasion resistance. So people may treat the visual nudge as something that we are doing advertisement on. So they are less uh, trust. So they probably view the loan with the loan with the label is less trustworthy. And we do find consistent with this, they go for the loan with provided by big banks, like the big four Chinese banks.
Mhm.
So they are going for loans that they think is safer, more secure.
Interesting. And what's out of all these different features, when you survey people and you ask them which one's most important to them, is there one that stands out? Is interest rate or approval rating or time to approval? Is there one that most people are picking, or is it across the board?
Approval rate. Most people want a high approval rate.
The high approval rate is the
Mhm.
main one.
So about So yeah, so about 50% of people they prefer the highest approval rate, and then 25% people prefer the rest of two. So interest rate is not the most salient feature. I think one of the reasons is because interest rate usually doesn't differ that much. So
Mhm.
in China, if you take a consumer loan nowadays, about like on average is 4%, but the highest one is probably 6, 7%, the lowest one is probably like 3%.
Okay. And so, of the people who say they care the most about approval rating and you show them the approval rating label, you still see these persuasion issues? Like you still see people moving away from the label there?
Um, so let me first finish the whole picture. I think so. The persuasion resistance, we think is one of the reasons because we do see that compared to the people who avoid the label versus the control, they are more likely to pick the loan provided by the big four national banks in China. But we also find those people not only they're picking the big four banks, but they're also more likely, like 10, 15% more likely to go back to the first loan. And then we interpret this as so essentially,
To pick the
um, in
loan
the
at the
control,
top. When you
the
say
loan
the
on the
first
top, they
loan, you mean
avoid.
and the loan on the top.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So they even have stronger primacy bias than the control. And then we interpret this as because they care about three different attributes, but we are highlighting one of them. So essentially, we are highlighting the trade-off between the three different loan attributes, which makes them even more confused or like increase their decision difficulty. And then because they're more confused, they find the decision is even harder to make. So they just go back to the heuristic decision making, which is the first loan. And we do find that. And consistent with what we find when they face increasing decision difficulty, they go back to familiarity, safety choice, and the first loan. We do find on average the people who avoid it, because we can see how much time they spend on making decision, looking at the back end data, and we find the people who avoid the loan they spend like 20% more time on picking the loan. But then when they use heuristics, which means that when they pick the first loan or when they pick the loan from the big four banks, they make decision much faster.
Oh, interesting. And so it sounds like the labels are a lot worse at nudging people than just putting the loan at the top.
Yes, yes. So the policy recommendation is you should just put the best loan on top. But again, the challenge is we don't know what's the best loan. Now come back to our question on the preference. We did try the partition by whether the content of label match with their preference. But the issue there we realized is that um, um, so among the people in the treatment group, among our sample borrowers, about 65% of them, they don't have a clear preference. So they say that, oh, I care about everything. So the score they put on each dimension is the same. It's either like 666 or 555 or 777. So there we don't really know what they value. And then among the people with a clear preference, most of them care about approval rate, and then um, the other care about the other two attributes. But then the difference in the preference score are not that big. The standard deviation is 2 on average. So
I
it's
think
not like they say, oh, I can.
just to back
Oh,
up,
sorry.
just to back up, the question you ask is something like, how much do you care about interest rate from 1 to 7 or 1 to 10?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Four
Okay.
to seven.
One,
Exactly the same scope you used for the other paper, like the time preference paper.
Perfect. So I think 1 to 7 is a really common kind of set of uh, way to do this. I guess
Mhm.
another way to do this would have been to have them rank preferences.
Yeah.
Now, there's a
Hmm.
downside to ranking, which is that you're sort of forcing them into making a
Yeah.
choice between first best and second best, and perhaps they are, in fact, indifferent
Hmm.
across them. And that raises a whole set of issues we
Hmm.
don't have time to talk about, which is like measurement error in survey questions and how should you formulate the survey? What does it mean? Are they picking the top choice in your survey questions as well? So that's a whole other literature.
We do encounter like similar survey issues later on when we do post, but I can talk about this later. We do find people are not really revealing their true preference later on. But at least for the pre-survey, because it's really simple, it's 1 to 7, and then we kind of think is accurate because there's no incentive for them to lie.
Mhm.
But we do find people, at least like in their reviewed preference, like in their stated preference, they say that they care about all the attributes. So that causes the problem, which means we have to, when we partition by the type of when we partition by preference, we don't know how to deal with the people with like pretty balanced preference.
And I think the preferences raise an important point as well. There's kind of two ways to think about consumer welfare and choice.
Mhm.
And this is something
Mhm.
I think about a lot in my work on health insurance decision making. And the idea is that there's one kind of world in which one choice always dominates the others for any person. So regardless of your preferences, regardless of which
Mhm.
feature you care about, there's always in
Mhm.
your context, there's always um, one lending product that is both lowest interest rate, lowest time to approval, highest approval rating, and you'd be able to just say, look, if people aren't choosing this, it's a mistake because nobody should choose something different.
Mhm.
Now, they might choose
Yeah.
something different because these are also being offered by different banks. And so you need to standardize all the
Mhm.
banks and say, like, it's all offered by the same bank. Choose which one you
Mhm.
want. One is going to dominate. And then that welfare analysis becomes really easy. But the problem
Mhm.
arises with welfare analysis is when people have different preferences and there's no clear kind of best choice.
Yeah.
And that's where, when you go from a world where one choice is best, you can just list it at the top. So that's your
Mhm.
recommendation. That's going to be work better than the labels. And then we're
Mhm.
done. But in this case,
Mhm.
you don't really know what people want. So you need to actually
Yeah.
simplify the information or try to explain it in a way that you
Mhm.
can guide people to make a choice that's aligned with their
Mhm.
preferences, that's also the
Mhm.
best fit given their preferences or kind of dominates given their preferences.
Mhm.
And that's a much harder problem because it's also
Yeah.
hard to elicit what people actually want,
Yeah.
as we
Mhm.
also know. So did you
Yeah. And
actually, were your outcome measures, in fact, they actually took up the loan or they just clicked on the loan and kind of started the process, or what kind of data do you actually have?
Oh, so we observe whether they click on they click on apply that loan, but we don't know if they eventually get a loan because the platform is essentially a middleman between the bank and the consumer. We don't know whether the bank eventually will approve the loan. We just know that they applied this loan and the bank is processing it.
So then one other question I have, and maybe you don't have this data, is you must
Mhm.
also have consumers that come to the website and don't click on any loan. Do you observe
Mhm.
that?
We observe about like 10% of them.
And that does not is not affected by the labels.
So we find the label has a so label slightly increase the probability of a person apply at least one loan, but it's a really small magnitude and it's statistically not really strong. And we don't know how to explain that. It's 10% significance, so it's marginal, but we don't know why. So we
Mhm.
just document. It seems that label increase the participation, but we don't have a good theory for now to explain this phenomenon. But yeah, but it seems that label does have a really small positive effect on the participation.
Oh, cool. All right. And so what is it that the lending platform wants? Like, what are they trying to maximize?
So their goal essentially is along with the government's goal to stimulate economy by making more people to borrow consumer loans so that they can consume because China does have this problem of underconsumption, especially after COVID.
Hmm.
China has pretty high saving rate, but people just don't want to spend money and they don't have the confidence. So the government are one is using those online lending platforms to hopefully give them easier access to credit. But also there are other ways government is doing. For example, give like coupons and give like discount on like if you buy things, they'll give you a discount. But here we focus on this platform, which the goal is solely to help consumers to better access good credit.
So if that's the goal, then you want everybody picking the highest approval rating loan or the highest approval rate loan.
Uh, that's sort of also what that's the government's goal.
Got it. Okay. But I would imagine the lending platform just cares if they can match a consumer to a loan and potentially match them to a loan in which they're happy with. So they come back again to the same platform if they want
Yeah.
another loan.
That's also what that's what the platform want. They want more users, so they want people to actively borrow on this website on this mobile app, and then keep coming back.
So do you have a new experiments planned for this platform or was this kind of a one-off?
So we do have so this is like the only one that we are running right now, but we do have some other thought. For example, the government have so the platform not only is consumer facing, but also is facing like small businesses.
Hmm.
Um, they so the government also want the small business to like more actively borrow money and then they can invest or hire people. But so one of the policy the government is implementing is called the risk sharing. So if you are a small business owner and you borrow from banks and participate in this risk sharing program, if you default on the loan, the government will pay the bank to compensate for the risk.
Hmm.
So if you cannot pay the interest rate, so if you cannot pay the interest expense, I think the government will cover like 80% of the interest payment for the small business to the bank. So that's the program the government tried to promote from last year, and then we kind of want to help government to promote to keep promoting this program. And we don't have a good idea for now, um, because the primary reason is because we're stuck with this experiment and we try to push this paper out. But we also want to have a good design because this is a really big program. They have about 4 to 500 million RMB, which is almost 100 million USD reserved for this program.
Well,
And
and
we don't want to waste this opportunity.
they're willing to work with you to help promote it.
That comes to the connection between the department head and the CEO because they are good friends and they are willing to. So we need to propose our experimental design to the company, and then they'll also review this with the government. And if they think the plan is reasonable and will help them, then they are happy to implement.
That sounds like an amazing opportunity. That's very cool. So just to sum
Yeah.
up, some really interesting work that you're doing in online lending in China. We learned
Mhm.
today about primacy bias. So this is your tendency to select the very first item in a list. And in
Mhm.
this case, people were selecting the very first loan. And
Mhm.
then what you guys did is you tried to see whether you could nudge people toward better loans using labels. And there was some small
Mhm.
positive effects. Now, the ROI on labels is pretty low because it doesn't cost you anything to put a label up. So even small effects might matter. But there is a potential downside, which is that some borrowers avoided the lower position labeled loans,
Mhm.
potentially because of persuasion resistance. So being
Mhm.
avoiding these labels because they're suspicious of them. And then also potentially due to cognitive load. So just increasing the
Yeah.
cognitive resources required
Yeah.
to think through all these features.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really cool research.
I, also, I want to add one more thing, and we find the issue is like the persuasion resistance and also the increased cognitive load. Those effects are stronger among the poor people, like the people with low financial literacy, because we do measure the education, the income, And we find this phenomenon is stronger among the people who don't have strong financial background, and then also stronger among new users. Somehow we also find the tendency to pick loans from large banks are stronger for female borrowers, potentially
Interesting.
because they are more risk averse.
Okay. Well, that's a really interesting trying to understand heterogeneity. And especially, we didn't talk a
Yeah.
lot about financial literacy, but we know financial literacy is low around the world. So
Mhm.
there's this big study by Anna Maria Lusardi and Olivia Mitchell looking at this and really understanding what are the consequences of low financial literacy is super important. So in this case, potentially loss of trust in institutions and then
Mhm.
increased confusion when thinking through features of financial products. Really very interesting.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for talking today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.